lost myself. I need you to make it turn. I know. Will you follow me when the sky starts to change? Yeah, we won't be afraid. We'll never be the same again. Will you follow me? We won't leave it to chance. We can't wait on romance. We'll never be the same again. I could keep the light from turning into darkness. You'd be my escape. What have we been told? Is it true or false? Future might seem every spot we getting close. Will you follow me when the sky starts to change? Yeah, we won't be afraid. We'll never be the same again. Will you follow me? We won't leave it to chance. We can't wait on romance. We'll never be the same again. Will you follow me when the sky starts to change? Yeah, we won't be afraid. We'll never be the same again. Will you follow me when the sky starts to change? Yeah, we won't be afraid. We'll never be the same again. Will you follow me? We won't leave it to chance. We can't wait on romance. We'll never be the same
You're streaming with the Fantasy Follow. What's up, everybody? Welcome to TFF Live, Week 14 of Fantasy Football, and this is it. For most of you, your Fantasy Football playoffs are underway. For some of you, they might start next week, but still, this could be a very important win for you this week to make those playoffs. Either way, a big day of football ahead. We're glad that you're joining us for it. Give you a look at what's on today's show. Take a look back at last week's action. Give you some player updates from around the league, actives and inactives for the 1 p.m. games, and our starts and sits for Week 14. Also, don't forget, as always, our live chat is open, answering your fantasy football questions all show long. And if you're watching on replay, please feel free to leave your comments below. But let's get right into it. Well, this is another tough week for those of you who have Christian McCaffrey as your top pick this year in fantasy football. Once again, McCaffrey listed as doubtful this week, not expected to play, shoulder and quad injuries. Incredibly disappointing for those of you who either have made your fantasy football playoffs and have waited for him to return, or you're making that last week push to get there and hope to have him back. McCaffrey now will have missed 9 of his last 10 games. Just so unfortunate. It'll be Mike Davis again in the backfield there. Once again, Christian McCaffrey not expected to play today again versus Denver. Take a look back at the recap of last week's action, week 13 of fantasy football, and we start out, as always, at the quarterback spot. A great week for Derek Carr from the Las Vegas Raiders, 32.74 fantasy points leading the way. That was 381 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, also added 5 yards and a touchdown on the ground. It was Josh Allen in second from the Bills. That was a win against the 49ers, 30.10 fantasy points. That was 375 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, also 11 yards on the ground. Baker Mayfield next up for the Browns in a win against the Titans, 28.96 fantasy points. That was 334 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, additional 5 yards on the ground. And then Ryan Tannehill for the Titans in a loss to the Browns, same game, 28.56 fantasy points, 389 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, no yards on the ground. And Matthew Stafford for the Lions against the Bears, 27.08 fantasy points. That was 402 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, no additional yards on the ground. Top scorers at the wide receiver position, led by Corey Davis from the Tennessee Titans in that loss to the Browns, 35.20 fantasy points. That was 182 yards receiving on 11 catches with 1 touchdown. Devontae Adams from the Packers in second, 34.10 fantasy points in that win against the Eagles. That was 121 yards receiving, 10 catches, 2 touchdowns. Cole Beasley for the Bills, 28.00 fantasy points. That was in a win over the 49ers, 130 yards receiving, 9 catches, 1 touchdown. Another nice game for Justin Jefferson from the Vikings, 27.30 fantasy points. That was 121 yards receiving, 1 touchdown, also added 2 rush yards to that total. And then Marvin Jones Jr. for the Lions, 25.60 fantasy points in that win against the Bears, 116 yards receiving, 8 catches, 1 touchdown. Top scorers at the running back spot from last week, led by David Montgomery from the Bears. That was in a loss to the Lions, 27.10 fantasy points. That was 72 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns, also adding 4 catches for 39 yards, no touchdowns through the air. Dalvin Cook in second from the Vikings, 23.90 fantasy points. That was 120 yards rushing, also adding 6 catches for 59 yards, no touchdowns from either. Then it was Aaron Jones from the Packers, 23.80 fantasy points in that win against the Eagles. That was 130 yards rushing with 1 touchdown, adding 3 catches for 18 yards, no touchdowns through the air. James Robinson continuing his nice year for the Jacksonville Jaguars, 22.80 fantasy points. That was in a loss to the Vikings. That was 78 yards rushing with 1 touchdown, also 6 catches for 30 yards, no touchdowns through the air. And then Jonathan Taylor from the Colts, 22.50 fantasy points in a win over Houston. That was 91 yards rushing, no touchdowns there, adding 3 catches for 44 yards and 1 touchdown through the air. And the top scorers from the tight end position from last week, a huge game from Darren Waller from Las Vegas Raiders, 45.00 fantasy points. That was in a win against the Jets, 200 yards receiving, 13 catches, and 2 touchdowns. Another nice week for Travis Kelce from the Chiefs, 27.60 fantasy points. That was 136 yards receiving on 8 catches and 1 touchdown. Logan Thomas for the Washington football team, 24.80 fantasy points. That was 98 yards on 9 catches, with 1 touchdown. And then Mike Gesicki for the Dolphins, 23.80 fantasy points in that win against the Bengals. That was 88 yards receiving on 9 catches with 1 touchdown. And then Dan Arnold from the Cardinals, 20.10 fantasy points in a loss to the Rams. That was 61 yards receiving, 2 catches, 2 touchdowns. All right, let's get you some updates from around the league from the week leading up to today's game, and we will start out today in Dallas.
Mike, Zeke was pretty adamant yesterday about playing through this calf thing, regardless of the circumstances with standings, et cetera. Is there any consideration from the staff's point of view of shutting him down with the odds getting a little steeper to win the division?
No, I think like anything, you trust the medical staff and especially someone with Zeke's experience and he has been here his whole career. We're not going to expose anybody to a situation that could affect the future, the near or down the line. So this will be a medical decision like it is each and every week, and I have great confidence in Britt and Jim and obviously the feedback from Zeke.
Your running game and bringing more balance to the situation on offense, how much would that be bolstered if you were able to get Jacobs and Trent Brown back?
Is that the great Ed Werder?
Well, it's Ed Werder.
Wow. It's good to see you, Ed. I tell you what, man. Yeah, it always helps to have your feature back in action. I mean, it'll make a lot of guys like Josh Jacobs. So hopefully he's ready to go. And if he is, we'll make sure we hand him the ball. But he's a great back. And normally a great back makes great things happen. And that's what we need from our go-to guy.
First on Swift, were you guys able to ever determine if he for sure had a concussion and if he was still dealing with headaches after he was out of protocol? Was there some, I don't know, could it not have been a concussion? Could it just have been migraines? Is there some fine line there that between the two, I guess?
Yes, I think it's safe to say there is a fine line there, Dave, and I don't think it's for me to be able to comment on his health, and into the public, but yes, there is fine line and that we were looking at.
Yeah, Coach, can you describe a little bit about what happened with Austin, when it happened, how it impacts you guys, and what the chances of him playing are?
Yeah, I don't know, Mary Kay, when it happened. Kind of popped up, if you will. I don't know. I can't put odds on it. We'll see. I think the next 24, 48 hours we'll monitor it and then make a decision before game time.
Spider Y2 Banana. I wish I could do a John Gruden impression. That was pretty funny, though. Anyways, actives and inactives are up next. But before we do that, we remind you the TFF Live Sunday Pregame Show. We thank you for streaming with us right here on our YouTube channel. We're here every Sunday at 12 noon Eastern Time, taking you right up until game time, answering all your fantasy football questions and getting you ready for your matchups each week. Actives and inactives for the 1 p.m. games are up next. All right, we'll bring it back in here. We're going to get ready to do some actives and inactives. Before we do that, we go to the chat, and we got a chat here from Larry. Larry says, "Yo, Joe, yo, Larry," and again, got that drink ready for the pregame. Very nice there. I like it, Larry. Again, thank you, Larry, a very regular viewer, one of our most regular viewers of all, and we do appreciate all of you guys being with us each week on our show. We will put up our chat, reminding you that live chat is open, answering your fantasy football questions all show long. We got plenty of other content, but even if we're doing something else, feel free to jump in that chat, ask your questions. We will get back to those as quickly as we can. That's what we love to do. We'd much rather be talking with you than just be talking to you. But in the meantime, we will leave that notification up, and we will go ahead and get into actives and inactives for the 1 p.m. games. Here we go. Starting out, Houston at Chicago. Some stuff going on in this game here. We got no David Johnson. He is out to protocols this week. And also Brandon Cooks is not going to play in this game. So very interesting what's going to happen there in the wide receiver core with now no Will Fuller and no Brandon Cooks. Kiki Cutie will be active for this game. So yeah, we'll see what happens there. Nothing really to see on the Chicago side of things. All right, next game up is Dallas at Cincinnati. A couple of key names here, both of them active. Ezekiel Elliott, we heard about him in the soundbite from Mike McCarthy. He is not listed as inactive for this game, so he will go, as will T. Higgins for the Cincinnati Bengals. Also ready to go there. Obviously, still no Joe Burrow, still no Joe Mixon. Looking at Gio Bernard in the backfield, Brandon Allen throwing passes, and kind of interesting to see how that works out with the wide receiver core there in a great matchup, or what would typically be a great matchup against Dallas. We will see how that goes for that team. All right, next up on the line, we got here Kansas City at Miami. A bunch of names to talk about here. First of all, on the active side, we do have Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Tyreek Hill in the fold for this game. On the flip side of things, Miami today, no Salvon Ahmed and also no Myles Gaskin. He is also out to the protocols. Gaskin also, in fact, not looking like he will play next week either. So perhaps DeAndre Washington, we will see what happens if he gets a run in that backfield, or perhaps even Patrick Laird today. Interesting game here. Two top teams really this year, Kansas City and Miami. 11-1 home game for the Dolphins. Can they possibly somehow swing this upset? We will see. All right, next up to the what used to be the Meadowlands, MetLife Stadium, Arizona at the Giants. Bunch of names here. We get Larry Fitzgerald back for the Cardinals, and DeAndre Hopkins is not listed as being out for this game, so he will be able to play. On the flip side of things, all of this on the Arizona side, Zane Gonzalez, we don't always talk about kickers, but perhaps a kicker here is of consequence here. You may need to know to get that player out of your lineup. And Andy Isabella is a no-go in the wide receiver core for Arizona. Again, we don't see Kenyon Drake listed, so it looks like Kenyon Drake is good to go there. We'll see if he is at 100% in this game. And again, on the Giants side, I did not put Daniel Jones, but Daniel Jones is not listed as out, so it looks like he will likely get the start there this week, and no more backup situation there anymore. All right, next up, we're looking at Minnesota at Tampa Bay. Few names to look at here. One of them surprised me a little bit. On the Minnesota side, again this week, no Alexander Madison, and also Kyle Rudolph is out this game. Irv Smith is back in this game at tight end for the Vikings. On the Tampa Bay side of things, Leonard Fournette, it's possible that I just didn't happen to see anything for him during the week in terms of possible injuries, but this was a little bit of a surprise to me. For sure, this is good news if you have Ronald Jones in your lineup this week as you hit your playoffs, because you expect Ronald Jones to get all of the work now, or the bulk load of the work without Leonard Fournette in the lineup there. So good news for you if that's your situation for your fantasy football playoffs. All right, next up, we have got Denver and Carolina. Not a lot to see here that wasn't expected. Nothing really to see on the Denver side of things. No fantasy players of consequence listed as inactive. On the Carolina side, it's Christian McCaffrey. Again, we talked about he is out for this game, unfortunately, for Carolina, and unfortunately for those of you who were hoping to get him back for your playoffs. Also, DJ Moore is out to protocols this week as well. A possible bump there for Robbie Anderson, and also a little bit of a bump there for Curtis Samuel, you would have to think, in this game. And the last of the 1 p.m. games, we have Tennessee at Jacksonville. Jonnu Smith is back, tight end for the Titans this week. Nobody else really of consequence. Deontay Foreman is out at running back. We have seen him spelling Derrick Henry, not Travis Henry, Derrick Henry from time to time, but he is actually out for this game. On the Jacksonville side of things, really nothing to see there. Nothing that really was expected in any potentials there for players on the Jacksonville side. Taking a look at the rest of the run of games, we got a lot of games, 15 games between today and tomorrow. The 4:05 games, Indianapolis at Las Vegas. The player to watch for there is Josh Jacobs. Questionable right now. Looks like he is expected to play, but obviously a player to keep an eye on. Big decision there if you're going to play him in your lineup this week. 4:05 game, the New York Jets at Seattle. Again, looking at Frank Gore. He was in concussion protocol. I know that he was looking like he was going to be expected to play this week, and that certainly makes a difference there if you picked up Ty Johnson off the waiver wire this week as a possible plug-in with Frank Gore potentially missing that game. Got another player to keep an eye on as we go towards these afternoon matchups. And then 4:25 game, Green Bay at Detroit. The player to watch there is DeAndre Swift. Does look like he is expected to play. Not sure if the Lions will give him a full workload in this game or not. Nothing really on the Green Bay side that I'm aware of. Then another 4:25 game, it is New Orleans at Philadelphia. Obviously, Jalen Hurts getting the start this week for the Eagles. It's again Taysom Hill for the Saints. Don't believe there's really too many. Zach Ertz, I think, is expected to be back in the fold, although I guess he might have played last week, but I don't know how, that tight end situation in Philadelphia has been frustrating to say the least. But I don't believe there are any other real injury concerns there to speak of. Another 4:25 game, it is Atlanta at the LA Chargers. No Julio Jones for the Atlanta Falcons, so be aware of that as we get towards those afternoon games. We need to get Julio Jones out of your lineup. Keeping an eye on Todd Gurley. Looks like he is plenty expected to play this week, but he was having some issues during the week. On the Chargers side of things, nothing really to speak of over there. 4:25, the Washington football team playing at San Francisco. For Washington, no Antonio Gibson this week. Get him out of your lineup. I know it's expected that J.D. McKissick would see the bulk load there. I don't potentially see it that way. I really don't think McKissick's role changes a whole lot from what it's been, in my opinion. I think Peyton Barber will get the snaps that were going to Gibson in the purely run aspect of their running backs. I think McKissick will continue to see the workload as the pass catcher out of the backfield, but I do not expect him to be a bell cow in this game. San Francisco, I don't believe there's a whole lot to speak of there. They have been getting healthier as they've gone along. I don't know if there's any changes from last week in that game for that team. The Sunday night game, the Pittsburgh Steelers playing at my Buffalo Bills. Big game in terms of real football here in Buffalo. In terms of fantasy, I don't believe there's anybody to speak of. James Conner back in the fold this week. On the Bills side, it's still not John Brown still not in the lineup there for the Bills, but no real big changes there. And then the Monday night game tomorrow is Baltimore at Cleveland. And again, nothing really unexpected there on either side that I am aware of. In terms of injuries at this point. I shouldn't say that. Austin Hooper is expected to be a game time decision for this game. So if you are expecting to play Austin Hooper as your tight end this weekend, be prepared with some sort of a backup plan in the event that he does not go. That's the run of games. 15 games between today and tomorrow. A ton of action as you go to your fantasy football playoffs, or perhaps needing that last win to make your way into the playoffs. A big couple days of football are ahead. All right. Again, we remind you that the live chat is open. We are here to answer your fantasy football questions all show long. Even if we're talking about something else, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and we will get to them as soon as we can. In the meantime, let's put up another piece of our information here, and we are the Fantasy Follow. We are a brand new channel on YouTube this season. We appreciate all of you who have joined us throughout the year. We are halfway to our goal of 100 new subscribers, so we thank all of you who are already in the fold. Those of you who are new to the stream, if you like what you see here, make sure and hit that subscribe button so that you can get those notifications whenever we have new content. We are also on Twitter, and that is at the Fantasy Follow, and that's fantasy spelled FNTSY. And you can send us your fantasy football questions during the week to our Twitter, and use the hashtag AskTFFLive, and we will answer those questions right here on this show. Facebook / The Fantasy Follow, and the website, thefantasyfollow.com. All right, we'll bring it back in. Let's take a look at the chats. I don't think we have much else to speak of here right now, so we can go ahead and move forward with some more of our content at this point. And let me go ahead and get rid of that chat notification on the bottom of your screen. But as we go through the rest of this content, please, again, feel free, drop us your chat whenever you would like. Let's go ahead with this week's starts and sits for week 14 of fantasy football. As always, starting at the quarterback spot. Our top start for this week at the quarterback spot is Justin Herbert from the LA Chargers. Herbert playing the Atlanta Falcons, who are currently allowing the most fantasy points to the quarterback position. They have given up 20-plus fantasy points to 8 different quarterbacks this year, currently allowing the 3rd most passing yards in the league. Justin Herbert, obviously a couple of down games in recent times here for LA, averaging just 11.90 fantasy points over his last 2 games, only 1 touchdown in this span. I think this is a great bounce back spot for Herbert and the Chargers, and I also do extremely like the wide receiver core in this game. I don't know if there's anybody who you don't like in this game on the Chargers side of things, but Justin Herbert is the top start this week. I see a comment here in the chat, so let me go ahead and pop that up on the screen. Daniel Padilla, welcome back, Daniel. Glad to see you again on the stream today. You say hi again. So sad CMC is out again. I waited most of the season just to get him for the playoffs, and he's out. I can totally understand that. Just a rough situation, I know, for those of us. I didn't happen to have McCaffrey in any spots this year, but I had Michael Thomas in a couple of spots, and it was the same sort of situation, just waiting, hoping to get him back, and just trying to survive. Yeah, definitely difficult. Not sure what his status might even potentially be for next week if you can continue to make your way through. But yeah, certainly for those of you, losing your top draft pick is not fun in fantasy football, and by all means, not what you want as you try to go after that fantasy league championship. Again, Daniel Padilla, glad to have you back on the stream. I know you were with us last night on our Saturday Stars show, so glad to have you join us on our Sunday pregame show, and absolutely we look forward to seeing you on future streams as well. We'll put up our reminders letting everyone know that the live chat remains open even as we go through other content. Please feel free to jump in the chat and let us know if you got any questions. We will move forward with the rest of our content. We're talking about starts and sits at the quarterback spot for this week. The number 2 start, I have got Ryan Tannehill from the Tennessee Titans playing at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jacksonville giving up the 4th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. They have allowed 7 quarterbacks 22-plus fantasy points this year and are also giving up the 4th most passing yards in the league. I like this spot a lot for Tannehill and the Titans. These 2 teams have played once already this season. It was week 2, and in that game, Ryan Tannehill, 239 yards, 4 touchdowns. That was 26.76 fantasy points, so bodes all the more well for this game. In addition, last week, Tannehill, just 389 yards, 3 touchdowns, 28.56 fantasy points against the Cleveland Browns. So I look for Tannehill to have another nice week this week. I've got Tom Brady in a nice matchup here against the Minnesota Vikings on the start list. Minnesota currently allowing the 18th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. They have given up 20-plus fantasy points 5 times this year. Have not done so since week 8, but as I mentioned on last night's show, the last 4 quarterbacks they have faced, Nick Foles, Andy Dalton, Teddy Bridgewater, Mike Glennon. So certainly I would say probably the top guy among that group is Teddy Bridgewater, but Tom Brady is obviously the GOAT, so you would expect him to have a great game against a Vikings team that has really been leaking to the pass, tied for 7th most pass yards allowed in the league. Brady has had 19-plus fantasy points in 4 of his last 6 games, 14 touchdowns over that stretch, so I like Tom Brady as a start for week 14. I've got Phillip Rivers in 4th for the Colts. That's a game at Las Vegas. The Raiders currently allowing the 9th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. They had given up 20-plus fantasy points to 6 different quarterbacks this year, currently allowing actually the 9th fewest passing yards in the league. We talk about this a lot when there's a big discrepancy there, a team allowing like the 9th fewest in this situation in terms of yards, but the 9th most in terms of points. That tells you they're giving up a lot of touchdowns, and also potentially they have, been vulnerable to some running quarterbacks, which Phillip Rivers certainly is not, but nonetheless, he will look to throw touchdowns this week. T.Y. Hilton has been very good in recent weeks. We see if that continues. Rivers, 14 touchdowns in his last 7 games, 18-plus fantasy points in all but 2 of those games, so he has been a little bit of a roll as of late. And then at the 5 spot, Big Ben Roethlisberger playing against my Buffalo Bills tonight in the Sunday night game. The Bills currently allowing the 7th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. They have given up 22-plus fantasy points 6 times this year and are currently allowing the 13th most passing yards in the league. Roethlisberger has been under 20 fantasy points in 6 of his last games. It's kind of weird because you see a lot of good matchups for Roethlisberger, but sometimes you just don't happen to see the fantasy production there. Nonetheless, you know they're going to throw the ball all over the place. So we'll see how that plays out in Buffalo tonight. All right, that's the starts on the quarterback side. Once again, we remind you that our live chat remains open for the rest of the show. We're about halfway through, so any chats that you guys have, feel free to jump in. Even if we were talking about other content, we're here to answer your fantasy football questions all show long. That is what we love to do, but we have plenty of other content to go through in the meantime. So let's take a look at the sits at the quarterback spot for Week 14. And the top sit this week, I've got Baker Mayfield playing on the road against Baltimore in the Monday night game. The Ravens currently allowing the 13th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback spot. They have only given up 20 or more fantasy points 3 times this year and are allowing the 14th fewest passing yards in the league. These teams have played already this year. In Week 1, it was Baker Mayfield, 189 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 10.86 fantasy points against the Ravens. He did have a very nice game last week, 334 yards, 4 touchdowns, 28.96 fantasy points against the Titans, but I think this is a much more difficult matchup for Baker Mayfield. I have got him as the top sit. All right, I do see a couple of chats here, so we will jump back over to the chat. We will continue with our starts and sits after we go through that, and I see a chat here from Bars in the Tuck. Bars in the Tuck, welcome to the stream. You look like a new viewer, so glad to have you with us. Absolutely, we appreciate all of our new viewers as we continue to grow this channel. You say, afternoon, with Gibson out, Akers on my bench, and Gaskin with COVID, I need a flex standard. Pick one, DeAndre Washington, Philip Lindsay, Wilson Jr., Jeff Wilson Jr. from the 49ers, I assume that is, or Pittman Jr. Thanks, hashtag playoffs. I like the hashtag. All right, let's do this. We'll get you some additional information to help us out with this decision. So we got a couple of running backs here, so let's put up the stats on the left side of your screen. This is fantasy points allowed to the running back's position, and we will take a look at these matchups as we go as I get to the right page in my notes here. So first, taking a look at DeAndre Washington for the Miami Dolphins. That is a 1 p.m. game home to Kansas City. Kansas City has been leaking a little bit to the run game. 13th on the left side of your screen there in terms of fantasy points allowed to running backs. I am not entirely sold that Washington gets all of the work in the backfield there from Miami this week, so I'm a little bit hesitant with him. We did see that he was nursing a little bit of an injury during the week, and I know there's not many other running backs to deal with there, but Patrick Laird could be another potential player who could get some of that work. So I'm not entirely sold on Washington, kind of getting like a bell cow type situation out of this here. So we will keep that name in mind as we move down the list here. Denver, Philip Lindsay playing at Carolina. I definitely like Melvin Gordon in this game. You have seen both of these players kind of get a close to an even split. Certainly a great matchup against Carolina, allowing the 8th most fantasy points to the running back spot. So I would say Lindsay is possibly in play for this choice. Jeff Wilson for San Francisco, Shanahanigans. You never know what they're going to do in that backfield, and they have so many of their guys back. Mostert, Coleman, McKinnon, Wilson. Who knows? You did see Wilson see a little bit more of the pass-catching work last week over Mostert. You just never know what's going to happen there. So those are risky plays. And again, the matchup against Washington, not great. The 3rd fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. Pittman Jr., let's go ahead and put up the points to the wide receivers. So this is the Indianapolis-Vegas game, 4:05 in Las Vegas. Vegas currently allowing the 13th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Of all the players that you have listed here, I kind of feel like you might have the most confidence here in Pittman of all of these players. He has been seeing a very decent amount of workload in terms of targets. I'm going to go ahead and call up over here on my other screen real quick his recent run of games, and I did not have that up yet, so I will have to get to that. Give me 1 second here. We do obviously know that T.Y. Hilton has been coming on of past weeks. But again, I do have Phillip Rivers as a start in terms of quarterbacks this year, so that kind of tells you that the matchup has a good chance to get you some decent points here. And I'm still working on this. Of course, my computer, anytime I want this information, wants to go slow. Just looking at the other guys, there are some question marks along the way with all of those other guys. Obviously, I think there potentially is less of a question mark in terms of Pittman's workload. I would probably say of the other guys that you listed, I think Lindsey would probably be my next choice. If I had more confidence in the fact that Washington would get the bulk of the work, I might go that way. If you need to take a chance on a guy that could potentially hit the biggest game, then it potentially is Washington if he were to get all of the workload. I finally got the stats up here for Pittman. So the last couple of games here, we're looking at the last 4 games for Pittman in terms of targets. 8, 3, 9, 5 in order in terms of yards. 101 yards in week 10, 66 with a touchdown week 11, just 28 week 12, and 46 in week 13. So not great. A reasonable matchup, though, against Vegas. To me, it's probably, in terms of feeling confident in the workload, you know what you're going to get from Pittman. You know what you're going to get from Lindsey. I think Washington is a little bit of a question mark. That may be worth a shot for you if you feel like taking a run at potentially the guy that could get the bulk load there. So I think my pick is probably Pittman here just because I feel less confident in Washington. But I don't fault you if you were going to try to take that big shot and possibly see that he does turn around the best day. All right, Bars in the Tuck, thank you very much for your chat. Glad to have you with us on the stream. Again, we welcome all the new viewers. And absolutely, as we continue to grow, we know we're a newer channel, so we're not necessarily as easy to find in the search. So you might have had to work a little extra hard to find us. We're glad that you did, and we're glad that you were with us. And we would be happy to see you more on future streams. All right, we got a chat here. And again, as I always say on these chats, if I miss anybody, let me know. It's not my intention by any means, and sometimes it happens. So if I do miss anybody, please let me know, and I will go back and try to find you. From Bobby Schmurda, welcome back, Bobby. Glad to have you back again. You say, do you know if Swift is capped with snaps today? I can't say that I've heard anything more in terms of the reports. So let me call it up real quick on my other screen here and see if there's anything noted here in terms of new reports. I really feel like they are not going to give him a full workload today. That's just my opinion. The only note here I see here is NFL Network's Ian Rappaport saying that Swift is expected to play. And then rumors that Swift would take on a limited role if he turned last week, but the extra week of rest may allow him to resume being the workhorse. So, yeah, this is what I kind of talked about. Last week when they were trying to work Swift back in, there was a soundbite from Darrell Bevel saying that they kind of wanted to take it easy in his first game back. My thought was potentially, I don't know why that would change this week unless the amount of practice that he got was enough to make a difference there, which potentially it is. Again, it's a tough situation because he's not playing until the afternoon game. So you're not going to necessarily get as much information on Swift. I do think it's a great matchup against Green Bay. Green Bay allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to the running back spot there on your left side of your screen. So again, this is one of those situations where this might be, if you need to swing for the fences, potentially you have a better matchup here, hoping that Swift gets the workload. And if for some reason he doesn't, you might have to live with that if that's your play in order to go after that win in the playoffs. And Bobby, I see that you say wishing you and your team the best, my man. I always love tuning in. Well, Bobby, we thank you, and we are glad that you are here as a regular on our stream. And absolutely, I wish all you guys the best for your matchups. And I do see you followed up on that previous question, and you were saying Washington or Pittman. And yeah, I can see an argument for both of those guys. As I always say, I hope whoever you guys choose in these situations, I hope they crush it. All right, we got a chat here from Braden Toll. Baltimore defense or Panthers D? All right, I don't necessarily have the left side of your screen stats for defense. So let me do this. Let's call on my other screen. I will just call up the stats here and see what we can try to help you out with. Baltimore obviously playing against Cleveland. That's the Monday night game, and Carolina against Denver. So I'm going to take a look at the fantasy points to each. Baltimore. Cleveland is currently giving up the 13th fewest fantasy points to DST. And on the flip side of that, Denver. Let's see. So that's Carolina. Where are they? There they are. Denver is in the green, so that's looking up. Denver, the 2nd most fantasy points to the defense position. So based on your matchups there, I think Carolina's defense has the better matchup of the two. And again, you're gonna balance that with the fact that Baltimore is probably the tougher defense overall. That probably, not that this helps a whole lot, that probably makes this a coin flip type situation. If you're going to play the matchup, Carolina has the matchup edge. If you like Baltimore's consistency throughout the year, playing against Cleveland, who has a great run game, I think if it were me, I would probably go with the matchup here. That's kind of the way I tend to lean with defenses, because a lot of times it's more about who you're playing than necessarily your defense yourself. So I think the Panthers have the edge there in that matchup. I will go Panthers D, but as I always say, when it comes down to the last minute decisions, go with your gut. I always try to give some information to back up my opinion, but you know your team better than anybody else, and by all means, I hope whichever you go with, I hope they crush it for you. All right, we got Daniel Padilla here with a question. I have to start too. Washington for Miami, Swift for Detroit, T.Y. Hilton for Indy, Lazard for Green Bay, Higgins for Cincinnati. All right, let's start out on the running back side. We've got a couple here to look at. We'll look at their matchups. Washington in the Miami game, home against Kansas City. Kansas City allowing the 13th most fantasy points to the running back spot. Certainly a decent matchup there. No clue what's going to happen with the workload. That's completely up in the air. But again, when you're comparing that with Swift, that might be just as much up in the air. But the matchup, Detroit against Green Bay, is a better matchup, the third most fantasy points to the running back spot. To me, if I had to pick, if I'm strictly talking the running backs first, I like Swift over Washington here. I think it's a better matchup. I think potentially, even if they do plan to limit him, if he gets out of the gate fast and starts to have a big game, they probably ride the hot hand. You're worried about Adrian Peterson's workload there. But I do think probably of those two, Swift over Washington. And then as we look at the wide receiver side, T.Y. Hilton, Indianapolis at Las Vegas, 405. Las Vegas, the 13th most fantasy points to wide receivers. He's been playing great. I can't say that I don't like him in this spot. Lazard for Green Bay against Detroit. Detroit allowing the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers. Another nice matchup. And T. Higgins for Cincinnati, playing at home against Dallas. Dallas allowing the 4th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. I'm obviously hesitant in the Cincinnati situation because of the quarterback, Brandon Allen there. I think that's a downturn for most of the receivers, even though that is a great matchup. It is very possible that some of those guys do have a nice day, guys like Tyler Boyd and whatnot. But to me, out of those three, I think T.Y. Hilton is probably the guy that I like the most there. Just because he's been so good as of late. A couple of big games in recent games here. See if I can give the exact stats to help you out in what he's had. No, I don't have the exact stats written down. But I do like Hilton this week. I think it's a good matchup there. I'm going to go ahead and try to see if I can call him up real fast because sometimes it is helpful to take a look at what those actual numbers were. So the last two games, this is a half-point PPR screen I'm looking at. 81 yards and a touchdown in week 12, 110 yards and a touchdown in week 13. That was 16.10 points in half point. Adding on 2 is 18.10 for full PPR. And then last week, 21 with 8 catches. So another 4 is 25 if you're playing a full PPR. So I'm probably going to say I like Hilton there. And I'm also going to say I like Swift to split it up between the running back and the wide receiver rather than going with one of each. I think it potentially has to do with your matchup and where you feel like you are against your opponent. Are you projected to win or are you projected behind? And that might affect how much swinging for the fences you want to do. Because I do think that Swift or Washington are a little bit in that makeup. We're a little bit more potential, but a little bit more unsure of what you're going to see in terms of volume. But I will say, and as I always say, whichever guys you choose, I hope they crush it. And I hope that some of that information helps you make that decision for who you're looking for. But I think that Hilton and Swift, with good volume for each, are fine starts on both sides of that. And thank you again, Daniel Padilla, for being back with our stream again. We look on to Rob Navarro, again, another regular from our Saturday Star show last night. Welcome back, Rob. And you say full PPR, McKissick, Mike Davis, or Chase Claypool at flex. Full PPR. Let's take a look at some of the stats. I will say this right off the bat. I have liked Mike Davis all year long. I think he has the volume there to carry the day, and I also think he's going to get plenty of work as a pass catcher there. So right off the bat, I will say I like Mike Davis. Taking a look at the other matchups, the Washington matchup against San Fran, a little tougher. 7th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot, so not as great of a matchup. Carolina at home against Denver. Denver, the 15th most fantasy points to the running back spot. And then we move over to the Claypool side of things. I'm a little bit leery of Claypool this week because I feel like he may be the most likely to see Tre'Davious White out of that secondary for Buffalo. Nonetheless, he has been seeing volume. He didn't see quite as much volume last week, but you expect Pittsburgh's going to throw the ball, so it's hard to say he's not going to see volume. But again, in that matchup, Buffalo, fantasy points to wide receivers, they are 23rd, so that is the 10th fewest. I think Mike Davis is the top matchup of those three. Carolina, again, home against Denver, 15th, just above the halfway point. But I like Davis to get all of the workload. Again, McKissick, I'm a little bit hesitant. I don't think, as some have expected, him to get all of the work in terms of rushes and pass catching out of the backfield. I think it's going to be Peyton Barber mixing in for a lot of that. I just feel like they are not going to try to run McKissick into the ground in this game. And Chase Claypool, I think, is probably, of these three, I would probably put him second. I think certainly he has been great all year long, and you expect, with the Steelers throwing the ball like they are, for him to be in play in that game with the volume. But I will say Mike Davis, I think, is a fine start here. And as I always say, whichever guy you choose, I hope they crush it. But hopefully some of that information helps you along the way into your potential choices. And I see a couple follow-ups from Bobby Schmurda saying Swift and Lazard in the previous chat. And you say Lazard is going to have a huge game today. Certainly Aaron Rodgers is, when you have Aaron Rodgers as a quarterback, that certainly never hurts your fantasy matchup at all. Rob Navarro with a follow-up, full PPR, Kareem Hunt or Zeke at flex. I think you have to go with Zeke here. I don't think the injury concerns you. I think if it was bad enough, they would have just held him out. Dallas certainly isn't going very far. You wouldn't think this year. I guess potentially they still are in play. But I think of the two, you go with the volume. And again, with these decisions, I always talk about four things: ability, volume, matchup, and game script, in that order. So ability being number one, you got a top tier running back. You selected him as high as you did in your draft for a reason. I know it hasn't been as great of a year, but I think you lean on him at this point. Kareem Hunt, taking a look at the matchups, is the tougher matchup against Baltimore. Again, Baltimore to the running back position, 25th, 8th fewest. Cincinnati to the running back position, 17th, and also they're allowing much more rush yardage. I don't have that number in front of me, but I do remember that from last week's stream. So I think the better matchup is on Zeke's side of things. I think potentially this may be one of the few games this year where Dallas plays with the lead for a lot of the games. So this is a better game script for Zeke. I think all signs point to Zeke in that matchup. To me, Kareem Hunt has been a little bit down the past few weeks in some better matchups that I have liked for him. So, Rob, I'm going to say Zeke here. Again, same deal as always. Hopefully some of that information helps you. Always go with your gut. I try to give you a little bit of information to back that up. But that would be what I would say. I think Zeke is a fine start for you between those two. All right. From Braden Toll, Calvin Ridley or Nick Chubb. This is a close one. Let's take a look at these two matchups. Calvin Ridley for Atlanta. That is a 425 game at LA Chargers. They are currently allowing, let's see, where are they? Oh, a little lower than I thought. They are the 5th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Obviously, no Julio Jones in that game. Ridley is sure to see an uptick in volume there, as will probably Hunter Hurst, Hayden Hurst, Hunter Henry, Hayden Hurst. They're both in the same game. I might as well combine them. The thing is that in the games that Julio hasn't played this year, we've seen Matt Ryan really struggle. So does that impact what you're looking at here for Calvin Ridley? I think Nick Chubb has been fantastic all year. The matchup against Baltimore is also not great. The 8th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot there, as you see on the left side of your screen. To me, I probably trust Chubb. Again, looking back to they've both been really good this year. I don't know. I'm not sure if you told me earlier what format that you're playing in here. You may have told me sooner down. I see Bobby Schmurda asking the same question. Ridley, if it's PPR. And I would have to agree that probably will make the difference, because I do think those two are close. I certainly don't dislike Chubb at all in any of these games, regardless of matchup. But Ridley, you expect to get the volume. So I don't think there's anything wrong with starting him there. Probably PPR does make a difference. I don't think either one of those are bad choices for you. So I will say I can get behind either. But I think Calvin Ridley is a fine start. I think Nick Chubb is a fine start. Go with your gut on that one. And I do see you follow up and says you have Chris Carson and Montgomery as your main two running backs. So, yeah, if you're talking about playing, this is a flex question. If you have the choice between Calvin Ridley and Nick Chubb in your flex, man, congratulations on your win this week. I mean, you are stacked and you are in great shape. So either way you go, let's see, are they both late games? Atlanta is a late game and Cleveland is a Monday night game. You don't even have to make this decision right away. Take a look at your 1 p.m. matchups. Take a look at your opponent. Figure out where you are in that matchup and see if there is any advantage that you can tell between those two players based on where you're at. Do you need a bigger swing for the fences play? Or do you need a safer play? All those things are you have a lot of great options here. So I envy this choice. Whichever guy you go with, as always, I hope that they crush it. All right, let me see. I got a chat here let me get rid of this left side. Let's see where we at in terms of game time. We're 10 minutes away. Got a little bit of content left to go through, but we can speed through that. That is not a problem. We are here for your chats. Harry Oranges, welcome back to the stream. Glad to have you back, one of our regulars. You say Claypool, Lamb, or Swift for your Week 14 flex. Let me see if there's any follow-ups here, Harry Oranges. I don't see if it says what your format here is. I see a lot more chats, so I'm going to try to speed through these a little bit quicker. I will say I don't dislike Lamb in that matchup, but I think I probably trust Claypool a little bit more just because I would probably rather have Ben Roethlisberger throwing the ball than Andy Dalton, even though he's playing against his former team. If Swift were fully healthy, Swift would be my pick. It's the top matchup of all these guys. Playing Green Bay, the third most fantasy points to running backs. He's the swing for the fences guy here. If you trust that he's back and healthy and they're going to give him enough workload to be worth it, I think Swift is your guy. And if you're hesitant about the workload, then I think Claypool is next. Those would be my two choices. I am a little hesitant about the workload, but again, Swift is not a guy I have in any of my lineups. So it's not potentially really a situation that I have to have so much invested in. I certainly like Swift if he gets the work. If you don't feel like he's going to get the work, I would say Claypool is next among my choices. Again, thank you, Harry Oranges, for being with us here. Let me go to the next one. I want to try to get all these chats in before we get to game time in case you guys are making decisions. Brian Prince looks like a new viewer to the stream. Welcome, and you say start Gurley, Hunt, Mostert, or Duke Johnson PPR. Let's get some matchups to help you out with this one here. I will say right away, my gut says Gurley playing against the Chargers. In terms of fantasy points to the running back spot, allowing the 10th most, as you see there on the left side of your screen. Kareem Hunt against Baltimore. Baltimore lower down, 8th fewest. Also splitting the backfield with Nick Chubb. Gurley has it to himself, provided he's healthy. Mostert, again, Shanahanigans. Never know what's going to happen in that backfield. We didn't really see him get as much work as we thought last week. I'd probably be more hesitant with Mostert. And Duke Johnson, you're going to expect to get all the workload. So the volume will be there, but not as good of a matchup playing on the road at Chicago. Chicago currently allowing let's see, where are they? 23rd on the list, so 10th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. I say out of these guys, provided you're confident that he's fully healthy, which it looks like he is, I say Todd Gurley here. And you also have to take into account, without Julio Jones, perhaps more run game, also perhaps less goal line chances as well. So that kind of balances out. But I think of these guys, I probably say Gurley is the guy that I would think is a fine choice here. And again, as I always say, Brian, thank you for the chat. And whoever you pick, I hope they crush it and you're able to advance in your playoffs. Or if you're making your way towards the playoffs, you're able to make your way in with these players. Braden Toll, you say, yup, thanks. I say, nope, thank you. Absolutely. I always thank you guys for being on the chats. Swish is life. Looks like a new viewer to the live stream. Glad to have you. Swish is life. You say quarterback, Kyler Murray or Taysom Hill. Let's put up the numbers for the quarterback matchups. Kyler Murray, Arizona at the New York Giants. New York Giants currently allowing, let's see, where do we have the Giants on this list? 28th, 5th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback spot. Taysom Hill, New Orleans at Philly. Philadelphia currently allowing right in the same range, 23rd, 10th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback spot. I think this is a close one to me. I think they're probably even choices. You know, you trust Murray as the guy who's been doing it all year long, but perhaps has been a little bit suspect the past couple of weeks. Perhaps as he's still a little bit of a shoulder injury to deal with. I personally like Taysom Hill. I think the running game gives him a nice floor. I know he's been just okay in terms of passing. These are Taysom Hill I do have in a couple of spots. I don't have Kyler Murray in any spots. I would imagine it's a tough choice to sit a Kyler Murray for a Taysom Hill there. So if you go with what you trust more, you probably do trust Murray a little bit more, but I don't think that Taysom Hill is a bad choice either. So I think probably to me, I'm going to look up Murray's stats really quick because I really just want to see what he has done. He had a rough game against New England. I know that. And let's see what else looks like here. The last couple of games, yeah, he had one real down game, 8.9 fantasy points week 12, 17.42 against the Rams last week. Again, the Rams, a tough defense as well. The Giants are stingy, but the Giants are not the Rams. I would expect Murray to have a better game, a better week this week. And again, he's your guy that you drafted high in your draft. I think you tend to lean on those players. I probably lean towards Kyler Murray here, but I don't hate the decision for Hill if you decided to go that way instead. Either way, like I always say, I hope whichever guy you choose, I hope they absolutely crush it for you. Harry Oranges with another question here. Ty Johnson or Swift in week 14? Here's what I have not looked at. Frank Gore's status. And again, that is unfortunately a 4 o'clock game, so we don't know for sure if Gore is going to play or not. If Frank Gore plays, I don't think you can play Ty Johnson in this game. I think they're going to end up giving Frank Gore the workload. I'm looking for an update here, and it says today, Ian Rappaport says there's optimism that Frank Gore will play in Week 14 against the Seahawks. He needs to clear a final hurdle, which means he probably needs to get out of concussion protocol. I think the Jets would rather play Gore, so I am hesitant with Johnson here. I probably look to Swift. The good news is these are both 4 o'clock games, so you should have more information on Gore. If Gore does not play, you expect Ty Johnson. We saw him have a great game last week when Gore was out. That probably swings your decision in Johnson's favor. But I think if Gore is active, you go Swift here. Again, whichever guy you choose, I hope they crush it. But yeah, I don't think Johnson is a play if Gore is in the game. I think you go Swift in that situation. Braden Toll, playoff mode activated. Absolutely. And you say Kyler, obviously. Again, that's kind of the same situation. You say Ty about to go off on Seattle. Yeah, but the volume there, we don't necessarily know that he's going to get it if Gore plays. That's the big thing. Yes, he could have potential for a nice game. That all depends on Gore's status. Switch his life. Kyler hasn't played that great, and the Giants D killed Wilson last week. Again, all of these opinions are in play. That's why we go through all of these. Absolutely love talking through this stuff with you guys. All right, next guy here, Chill Will. Welcome back, Chill Will. We have got about 5 minutes to go, so I'm going to speed through these chats, try to get everybody in here. Flex, PPR, wide receiver, Beasley or Chris Godwin? Thanks, bro. No problem. Buffalo home against Pittsburgh. Wide receiver stats. Pittsburgh allowing 21st, so that is the 12th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. Chris Godwin for the Tampa Bay Bucks playing at home against Minnesota. Minnesota, the second most fantasy points to the wide receiver. I think this is a Chris Godwin spot. I think there's a nice opportunity for all players. That's a great matchup. I don't know how you can shy away from that one. Even though Beasley has been great as of late, I think Godwin is your choice there. All right, sliding on down. Rob Navarro says, thanks, man. I say no, thank you for being with us again. Ryan Voigt, start 3. Ridley, Deontay Johnson, Allen Robinson, Chris Godwin, Thielen. I will say I see 4 of these 5 guys right now that are all great matchups. Ridley, Robinson, Godwin, and Thielen. I like Robinson a lot this week. Let me put up the numbers here real quick. Chicago at home against Houston. Houston was torched. 11th most fantasy points to wide receivers. Ridley obviously getting the volume for Atlanta. The Chargers a little bit lower, so the matchup is not quite as great, but the volume should be there. Chris Godwin, and again, a great matchup against Minnesota. And Adam Thielen on the flip side of that against Tampa Bay. We saw Tyreek Hill with that big game. Tampa Bay, where are they on that list? 9th most. Based on matchups, I like Robinson. I like Godwin. I like Thielen. And again, I like Ridley. So, perhaps you can think about swapping in Ridley and taking out Allen Robinson here. That would be a possible play. I would probably not pick Johnson. Not that he's not going to play well, but the other guys are just so good. I think Godwin and Thielen are musts for 2 out of these 3, and I think you're probably picking between Ridley and Robinson for the next guy there. Thank you again, Ryan Voigt, for being with us. Looks like you might be a new viewer, so we definitely appreciate you guys, and hope your guys crush it there. Speeding through these to get through these before we have to go. Colton Cash, pick 2, A-Rob, Jacobs, or Swift. Jacobs and Swift, you have a decision to make in the late game there. It's Jacobs if he's healthy to me. It's Allen Robinson. I think I'm more hesitant on Swift. Obviously, injury concerns on both sides, but I think if Jacobs is good to go, they're going to run him. So I go Jacobs and A-Rob for those 2. Thank you, Colton Cash, for the question. Speeding through, Andreas Wellhaven, welcome to the stream. I think you might be a new viewer, although you might be a return viewer. Either way, glad to have you here. Start 2, Adam Thielen, Amari Cooper, Terry McLaurin, or Josh Jacobs, PPR. Adam Thielen I like for sure. I think it's a great matchup there for the Vikings. I like Terry McLaurin's matchup. And Josh Jacobs, I think if he's healthy, he's going to be my pick. Again, taking a look to see if the McLaurin game, yes, the McLaurin game is a 4 o'clock game. I will put up the stats here to wide receivers just for comparison. San Francisco, the matchup not great. 15th, midway point. But again, Jacobs in that matchup against Indianapolis, they are 20th to running back. The Colts defense has not been as great as of late. If he's healthy, he gets all the volume there. I like Thielen and Jacobs if he's healthy. If he's not, you have McLaurin also playing at 4 o'clock that can back you up in that situation. So you got a backup plan there. Thank you, Andreas. Next one here, kicks for Mike as I'm trying to speed through these. Swift or Jacobs? Again, both 4 o'clock matchups. I think if Jacobs is healthy, it's Jacobs here. If he's not healthy, then that changes things. But you're going to try to look for those reports to make that best decision. I like Jacobs personally, but I also think Swift, obviously a great matchup, 3rd most fantasy points. Green Bay gives up. Colton Cash went Swift, kicks for Mike, standard. That's, I like sticking with Jacobs here. And you follow up, say Colton Cash, they said Jacobs going to get a full workload. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the big difference here. You're watching your reports. That's what it's going to come down to. Again, you don't have to make this decision until 4, and both guys are playing at 4, so that's to your advantage. Make that count, and obviously keep an eye on that as that first run of games goes through. All right, we sped through those chats. That is faster than I like to normally go. I usually like to try to give a little bit more information to back up some of my picks there, but that was the speed round of fantasy football questions. And here's what we're going to do. We are at 1 o'clock. Please feel free to continue dropping chats. I know we're into the start of the games here. I am going to go through the rest of the starts and sits for those of you who are curious. Obviously, a lot of these games are already started up, but I will go through the rest of these lists even as we go a little bit past game time here. I believe we left off at the sits at the quarterback spot. I'll go through this a little faster. Baker Mayfield was my top. Derek Carr against the Colts, 4th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks there. Teddy Bridgewater against Denver, middle of the road. I could be on the fence with that one. Nick Mullins against Washington. Washington allowing the 11th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. And then Jalen Hurts, I don't know what to expect in that game, but New Orleans is tough. 3rd fewest fantasy points to the quarterback spot. So I've got those as your top 5 sits. Wide receiver, top start this week. I've got Justin Jefferson for the Minnesota Vikings. I think this is a great matchup playing the Bucs. 9th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. They'd give up 19-plus fantasy points 4 times in the last 3 games. We saw that big game from Tyreek Hill, allowing the 11th most passing yards this season in the league. Jefferson, 17-plus fantasy points in 4 straight games now and 100-plus yards in 2 out of 4. Obviously, I also like Adam Thielen, but again, Adam Thielen is, in my opinion, an auto start, so I don't normally include a player like that on this type of a start-sit list. The rest of the top 5 at the wide receiver position. Number 2, I've got Allen Robinson. We've already talked a little bit about him today. Houston allowing the 11th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot, 15-plus fantasy points 11 times this year. They have given up 4 100-yard receivers in the last 6 games. I love the spot for Robinson. He's been seeing the targets 7 or more now in 5 straight games, 15-plus fantasy points in 3 of those 5. I like Robinson today. Mike Williams, another player I like a lot against Atlanta. I think this is a great spot for the Chargers. Falcons giving up the 3rd most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Obviously, Keenan Allen also in play here. Again, considered an auto start. I like Williams in this matchup. I think there's plenty to go around. 19-plus fantasy points 4 times in the last 5 games for Atlanta. They are allowing the 3rd most passing yards in the league, and Williams has had 70 or more yards in 3 of his last 6 games. I love Corey Davis today. Corey Davis playing against Jacksonville for the Titans. The Jaguars allowing the 6th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. They have given up 15-plus 14 times. They have allowed a 100-yard receiver in 8 straight games. Certainly bodes well for not only Davis, but also A.J. Brown, again, a player who I consider an auto start. So that's why you find Davis on this list. And Tyler Lockett at 5. Now, I'm going to say this. This is interesting. Perhaps it's only interesting to me because it's a situation that I have in one of my leagues. But in one league where fantasy playoffs start next week, I am in a must-win situation. I have both Corey Davis and Tyler Lockett, and I had to choose between the 2. I want to say I believe my other receiver in that league is Michael Thomas. Off the top of my head, sometimes the leagues run together. But this is a decision that really bogged me down because both guys have great matchups. Lockett's against the Jets, 10th most fantasy points to the wide receivers, 16-plus fantasy points 12 times this year, 2nd most passing yards allowed in the league. However, Lockett has only had 12 or more fantasy points 2 of his last 6 games. We know he had those big games earlier in the season. My fear here is that DK Metcalf, the Jets are going to leak so much to the wide receiver spot that Wilson's just going to feed DK Metcalf, and perhaps Lockett doesn't see his. I ended up going with Davis in the choice for my league in particular there. He's been really good lately. I surely hope it works out. I definitely don't want to feel like I made the wrong decision there. So, yeah, these decisions are all over the place for all of us at this point, and that's where I'm at in the same boat. All right, the top sit, I've got the wide receiver spot this week. I've got Devontae Parker playing against the Chiefs. 3rd fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver position. They have given up 20 or more fantasy points 4 times in the last 4 games, so a little bit better. However, Parker last week against Cincinnati in what really couldn't be considered a bad matchup, 35 yards, 7.5 fantasy points. We've seen him obviously perform better with Fitzmagic than with Tua, so a little bit more hesitant there in terms of Devontae Parker. I made him the top sit for wide receivers this week. The rest of that list, Brandon Cooks. Now Brandon Cooks is out, I believe. So this is not even, I'm checking him out of the list. This is not even in play yet. Brandon Cooks is out, so you can disregard that. Don't play him. He will not get you very many fantasy points today. Jarvis Landry I have as a sit today against Baltimore, actually tomorrow. 6th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. I've got Nelson Aguilar against the Colts. Again, a tougher defense. And Aguilar is a guy you kind of keep expecting to have nice days, but hasn't necessarily had what you wanted to see from him. And I actually do have Chase Claypool. Again, he's a little bit on the fence to me, but I did put him as a sit because I do think he might be more likely to see Tre'Davious White in that matchup against Buffalo. So I do have him as 5th, although I could see an argument to go the other way, certainly, for Claypool. All right, let me jump back over to the chat here as we're halfway through and see if there's anything else here. And I do see a new one from Kicks for Mike, and you say, thank you, man. I say, no, thank you. And Kicks for Mike, looks like you're a new viewer to the stream. Again, we appreciate all of you guys that are new. By all means, as we always say, make sure, go ahead and click that subscribe button so that you get those notifications whenever we have new content. As a new channel, obviously, we're still growing, but we don't necessarily come up quite as high in the searches yet. So we want to make sure that you're able to get that information whenever we have new shows on your way. And thank you for being with us on the stream. All right, we will run through the rest of these start sits. I know we're past game time, but that's okay. We got the information. We might as well share it with you. All right, we did the wide receivers. Moving on to the running back spot. The top start I've got this week is James Robinson for the Jaguars, playing against the Titans. 7th most fantasy points to the running back spot. I'll continue to speed through these. He's at 100 or more yards 2 of the last 4 games. I think this is a great spot here for James Robinson. I think they will continue to look toward the run game with Mike Glennon as their quarterback. Top 5 starts, David Montgomery, a great matchup there against Houston. 3rd, Melvin Gordon. I also like the matchup there against Carolina. I've got Chris Carson against the Jets. I think it's going to be a nice game for Carson. And then I have Adrian Peterson. Again, this is more in the beware situation for Swift. In the event that they do not give Swift the workload, I think Peterson, that matchup is too good. Somebody's going to have a nice day. It's potential that they obviously both have a nice day in that backfield if Swift also gets the work. My top sit at the running back spot is going to be Miles Sanders for the Eagles. I liked Sanders a lot last week. He just has been showing it. I don't know. Obviously it's a tough situation in Philadelphia right now. A lot of things up in the air. Jalen Hurts is your starter. Who knows how that plays out? On top of that, the matchup is awful. The New Orleans Saints allowing the fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. So I've got Miles Sanders as the top sit this week for running backs. The rest of the top 5, got Devin Singletary from my Buffalo Bills against the Steelers. 2nd fewest fantasy points to running backs. Raheem Mostert, I've got him as a sit. The workload has been kind of shuffling around there, so it's kind of a beware situation. He could potentially have a nice game, or you could find him kind of ceding work to others. J.D. McKissick against San Francisco, another tough matchup there. And again, I don't necessarily feel that he is going to get all of the work there. I do think that Peyton Barber works in for a good chunk of it. And Mark Ingram, we've kind of seen the rest of the backfield there in Baltimore taking over. J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards. I think Mark Ingram is a sit this week. And lastly, to the tight end spot, the top start I've got this week is Eric Ebron for the Pittsburgh Steelers, playing at Buffalo. The Bills allowing the 6th most fantasy points to the tight end spot. They've allowed 11 or more fantasy points to 7 different tight ends this year. Ebron has seen 22 targets in his last 2 games, and in those 2 games, it was 12.4 and 13.8 fantasy points, respectively. I like Ebron as the top tight end start this week. The rest of the top 5, I like Mike Andrews in a great spot against the Browns, second most fantasy points to tight ends. Hunter Henry, another great spot here for Atlanta, 5th most to tight ends. Jonnu Smith coming back from injury against Jacksonville, 8th most. And Dalton Schultz against Cincinnati, 3rd most to tight ends. I like all of these players today. And finally, the top sit at the tight end spot. Despite the nice game he had last week, I do have Logan Thomas because of the matchup. San Francisco allowing the fewest fantasy points to the tight end spot. They have only allowed 10-plus fantasy points to 2 tight ends this year. Thomas, again, last week, 9 targets, 9 catches, 98 yards, and a touchdown. That was 24.8 fantasy points last week at Pittsburgh. This week, a much tougher matchup, and that's why I got him as the top sit. And the rest of the top 5, Dallas Goedert, that Philadelphia situation, oof. I don't know what else to say about that one. Playing against the Saints, I've got Goedert again as a sit this week. Evan Ingram, by all means, I don't have to, every week I kind of sigh when Evan Ingram has the matchup to be a start. This week he doesn't, so I have no problem putting him on the sit list. He's one of those players that I have such a hard time figuring out. Jared Cook, I think with Taysom Hill as your quarterback, I think it's always iffy for Cook in that offense at this point. I think Michael Thomas sees the bulk load of the targets for Taysom Hill. And then Robert Tonyan against Detroit. Detroit matchup not quite as great. Tonyan has been very good, but I did include him kind of as an on-the-fence sit this week. All right, we sped through a lot of that. Again, we appreciate all you guys for being on the stream with us. We're glad that you all joined us. And again, let's put up a little bit of our information here just to let you know what we have going on here for all you guys. Again, this was the TFF Live Sunday pregame show. We'll remind you that we are here every Sunday at 12 noon, answering all your fantasy football questions, taking you right up until game time, or in this case, about 10 minutes past game time. But that's what we're here for, and all the other content. We're glad to have you guys with us, and we appreciate all of you viewers that have been with us throughout the season. And again, our overall information, we are the Fantasy Follow. We are a brand new channel on YouTube this year. We're glad that all of you have joined us, and we thank all of you who have subscribed so far. If you have not done so yet, we want to make sure you get those notifications for whenever we have new content. And we do appreciate all of you that have helped us reach the halfway point on our goal to 100 new subscribers. We are also on Twitter at the Fantasy Follow, and that is fantasy, spelled FNTSY. And you can also send your fantasy football questions to our Twitter using the hashtag AskTFFLive, and we will answer those questions live right here on the Sunday pregame show. Facebook / the Fantasy Follow, and our website, fantasyfollow.com. A great day of football ahead today. 15 games between today and tomorrow. Excited to see what happens. Again, fantasy football playoffs. We want you guys to all crush it in your leagues. Get all those W's. If this isn't the start of your playoffs and it's next week and you're in that must-win situation, we want you to get there. We want to see you all make a run at your fantasy league championships. Again, a great day of football ahead. Can't wait to see what happens. As we always say, good luck in fantasy. We'll see you next week.